And I think the concept of chokehold sounds so innocent, so perfect. And then you realize if it's a one-on-one, now if it's two-on-one, that's a little bit of a different story, depending on the toughness and strength. You know, we're talking about toughness and strength. We are talking, there's a physical thing here also. But if a police officer is in a bad scuffle and he's got somebody,
well, if it's a one-on-one fight for the life,
yeah, and that does happen, and that does happen.
But
too. So you have to be careful.
So that was Donald Trump discussing the use of chokeholds by the police, something he bizarrely described as innocent and perfect, as strange as that may seem. Andrea, what is the rhetoric Trump is using, and why are we hearing it right now?
So yeah, in an interview on Fox News earlier today with host Harris Faulkner, Trump effectively removed all doubt that he's racist trash. During the segment, Trump kicked things off by lumping all of the demonstrations currently taking place in the wake of George Floyd's murder and Breonna Taylor's as riots and unnecessary. So he certainly made it clear within just moments of opening his mouth that this entire thing, the protests, the riots, the demonstrations, that he hasn't learned or cared to learn a single thing.
It's true. I don't think he takes anything into account. I think that actually was made clear probably during the kneeling in the NFL, when he absolutely refused to acknowledge that it was about anything other than what he said was the flag or the anthem, disrespect for our troops. But the thing is, these chokeholds, they're so serious that, you know, the LAPD outlawed them 40 years ago in 1980. Why are we still seeing this happen? And how is Trump seriously sitting in an interview talking about this now?
Well, per the usual for Donald Trump, the interview just actually got a lot worse as it went on. By the end of his sit down with Faulkner, Trump was attempting to not only excuse, but proudly and blatantly defend the use of these chokeholds by police officers in the United States by comparing the action by a law enforcement officer to a chokehold that he would have used as a high school wrestler. He harped back on his history in his high school days of wrestling competitively. And he even went on to say that the officers who find themselves in a position where they might use one of these chokeholds, it's just, quote, a tough situation.
A tough situation. That's hard to hear, because, you know, what's strange is how often the suspects being apprehended really aren't kind of posing any threat at all. They still, the chokehold still seems to be the standard fare, you know. Even bans haven't stopped cops from using chokeholds. And in other cities, you know, although regulations vary state to state, they still seem to be the go-to move. And it's hard to see someone take it so unseriously.
Right. And again, as we've come to expect with the president's behavior and rhetoric over the last 3 years, Trump continued to dig his own hole in this interview when he ultimately wrapped up his defense of the chokehold by declaring, quote, "I think the concept of chokeholds sounds so innocent and so perfect." You know, Andrew, I really wish that I could even act as though I'm surprised by this.
It's true. It's true. And the fact that he's so out of touch about what these do, you know, a chokehold was actually meant to be a humane way to take a suspect down. But since research started coming in on, you know, brain damage, nerve damage that these things were causing, people started questioning the cost to benefit ratio. And really, when you start talking in those terms about people, that's a pretty inhuman way to look at it to begin with.
Yes, absolutely. We have to face the facts here. Donald Trump has always and will always be far more concerned with the safety, well-being, and overall happiness of the predominantly white police officers who continue to fire rubber bullets and pepper spray into crowds of demonstrators, open fire in a sleeping house with a no-knock warrant, and place their knee on the back of the neck of an unarmed, handcuffed black man in the street than he ever has or will ever be with the victims of those situations. And what is most concerning to me at this point is the fact that he's not ashamed of it. Trump is very proud of not only the systemic racism that he continues to push and peddle in this nation, but his own personal racism, against people of color. Um, and I have to wonder, what does that say for the state of this country?
I mean, it speaks to his very personality, because you can see that Trump is totally enamored of the idea of, these brutal arrests of people. You'll remember him speaking in front of that large gathering of police union members and police officers, telling them, don't be afraid to be a little tougher on suspects. When you're putting your hand on their head as you put them in the car, don't be afraid to get a little rough with them. And it's gotten to the point where Congress has even considered a nationwide ban on chokeholds. But the fact is, we don't know if that would even work.
Well, and that's a very good point, because when you take these police forces that we see in today's day and time, especially, again, they're predominantly white. And you'll notice that a lot of them, they have conservative views. They're Trump supporters. I mean, we remember the big spread of Minneapolis police officers that were in attendance at a Trump rally. And there's even been reports in the past of a lot of these law enforcement officers getting caught involved in all out white supremacy groups. So when you have that tradition kind of racism in that group of people to begin with, it does make you wonder if this legislation that Congress is passing is going to matter to them, especially when you have someone like Donald Trump on the top, who's clearly, blatantly, proudly racist. And you see these officers that are already becoming so arrogant in their ways. It's hard to believe that they're going to follow legislation passed by Congress when the President of the United States continues to peddle the rhetoric and the behavior that they're so accustomed to and comfortable with.
That's absolutely right. You mentioned the police union members from Minneapolis on stage with him at the rally, and they were wearing "Cops for Trump" T-shirts. They
Yes,
do.
exactly.
Police unions, in fact, across the country are traditionally conservative. And when you couple it with a guy who feeds off of rallies, you can't help but think that maybe, you mentioned his high school wrestling, but maybe Trump is actually throwing back to when he was involved with professional wrestling. Maybe he thinks this is all scripted. Maybe he thinks it's all a game. Maybe he thinks these chokeholds don't hurt, don't injure, don't kill, because everything seems fake to him.
Right. And we have to understand that that's a trend with Donald Trump, and it really is born of his privilege. You're talking about an individual that, I mean, for one, was born white in the middle of New York City. I mean, how much more privilege do you get than that? And then you take all of the history of his life. I mean, even his real estate business when he was a mogul, back in the 70s and the 80s, that took place because his father handed him a business that he was allowed to just absolutely destroy, and it didn't matter. There was always more money to fall back on. There was more privilege to fall back on. So when you have someone that's built their entire life, I mean, Donald Trump is in his 70s, his late 70s. when you have someone that's built their entire life off of that sort of privilege, they don't take into account the realism and the reality that everyone underneath of him suffers when things like this happen. You know, it can be all a game to him because his entire life has been a game to him. I mean, even The Apprentice, you know?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think it's a no-brainer to say that somebody this out of touch, we just can't wait any longer to get this guy out of office. As far as I'm concerned, November can't come soon enough. I think that's
Absolutely.
I think that's about all the time we have for this segment. Thanks for watching. We will see you guys next time. And thanks, Andrea. Bye-bye.